Colleagues, students, distinguished guests, members of the University of Cape Town community and friends of the university. My name is Brandon Collier-Reid and I'm the Deputy Vice Chancellor for Teaching and Learning. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to this special occasion this evening as we gather to celebrate Professor Tanja Bosch's inaugural lecture. I extend a particularly warm welcome to Professor Bosch's family, friends, colleagues, collaborators, students, and mentors. No academic journey is traveled alone. Every academic journey is shaped by teachers who inspire, mentors who challenge, and colleagues who encourage, students who broaden our thinking, and loved ones who provide us with their unwavering support. Your presence this evening is a tribute to Professor Bosch and to the many people who have contributed to this remarkable milestone. I also wish to welcome our distinguished guests and members of Platform Party. We have Professor Elwani Ramagondo, who's the DVC People, Culture and Society. We've got Associate Professor Vinathan Naidu, who's the Acting Dean of the Faculty of Humanities, who will introduce Professor Bosch. We've got Professor Herman Wasserman from Stellenbosch University, who will offer a vote of thanks, and I will deliver the. So we are honored this evening to be joined by Professor Wasserman, who has a special connection with UCT, as many of you will know, and is here for this significant occasion. Now, Professor Wasserman's presence is a reminder that our universities are united by a shared commitment to advancing knowledge, nurturing critical inquiry, and serving society. The complex challenges facing our country, our continent, and our world cannot be solved by any single institution acting alone. They require collaboration across university disciplines, as well as collaboration across sectors. When institutions of higher learning work together, we strengthen research, enrich teaching, broaden perspectives, as well as amplify the impact of African scholarship. Partnerships such as these are essential if we are to build a more just, inclusive, and sustainable future. And you're in for a treat this evening. The program includes what you would expect, the formal introduction of Professor Bosch and the inaugural lecture itself, but that is not all. You'll also get to watch a screening of the experimental film Coastal Interrupted. And those of you that have been outside and seen the accompanying conceptual installation, RIP MacBook Neo, I urge you, if you haven't seen it, to go and take a moment to look at it and to leave a message as asked. An inaugural lecture is one of the most significant traditions in university life, and it marks the formal recognition of a professor's appointment while offering opportunity to reflect on their intellectual journey that has shaped their scholarship. It's both a celebration of academic achievement and an invitation to engage with ideas that challenge conventional thinking, inspire new conversations, and contribute to society. Universities have always been places where difficult questions are asked and new knowledge is created. They exist not simply to preserve knowledge, but importantly in this case, to interrogate it, expand it, and apply it to new ways and to improve lives. In an era where digital technologies influence almost every aspect of our daily existence, universities have an even greater responsibility to examine how these technologies shape our societies, our relationships, as well as our future. The title of this evening's lecture, Calibrated Intimacies, Apps and Decolonial Refusal, speaks directly to these questions. It encourages us to think critically about the digital platforms that have become part of our daily lives and to consider how they influence participation, identity, as well as how they influence power. It reminds us that scholarship has an important role to play in questioning the dominant narratives and to imagining more equitable futures. These are conversations that extend well beyond media studies. They are relevant to all of us as citizens, as educators, researchers, leaders navigating an increasingly digital world. This evening also reminds us that knowledge can be communicated in many different forms. Scholarship is not just confined to books, to journal articles, or to lecture halls. It can be expressed through film, creative practice, public engagement, as well as through dialogue. By bringing together academic reflection, an experimental film and a conceptual installation, tonight's program reflects the richness of interdisciplinary scholarship and the many ways in which universities engage the public imagination. We gather here not only to celebrate the achievements of one distinguished scholar, but also to reaffirm the values that define this institution: academic freedom, intellectual curiosity, creativity, rigorous scholarship, and importantly, a commitment to the public good. These values have sustained UCT for generations and will continue to guide us as we respond to the opportunities and challenges of our rapidly changing world. So on behalf of UCT, I offer my heartfelt congratulations to Professor Bosch on reaching this significant milestone. We are proud of your outstanding contribution to scholarship, to the field of media studies, and to the broader conversations shaping digital culture, communication, and society in Africa and beyond. We look forward to engaging with the ideas you will share with us this evening. And it is now my pleasure to invite Associate Professor Naidu to introduce Professor Bosch.
Professor Holly Reed, Labugondo, Professor Wasserman, and Professor Bosch. And let me start by welcoming colleagues, honored guests, students, friends, and family of Professor Bosch. Let me just single out specifically Professor Bosch's son, Mornay, their partner, Refilwe, and their niece, Anne, who is with us this beautiful evening. On behalf of my colleagues in the Faculty of Humanities, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to all of you to celebrate Professor Bosch on her promotion to full professor and on the occasion of her inaugural lecture. I want to start by first conveying the apologies of our dean, Professor Serge Kessie, who is unfortunately unable to be with us this evening. She asked me to convey her congratulations and her deep appreciation to Professor Bosch for her exceptional scholarship, her academic leadership to the faculty, and the service she has given over her many years. I want to start by saying that this evening we are celebrating a scholar whose work has consistently demonstrated that communication is never simply about the transmission of information. It is about power, participation, belonging, and it is about determining whose voices are heard, whose experiences are recognized, and how societies understand themselves through media and public discourse. Throughout her distinguished career, Professor Tanja Bosch has explored precisely these questions. Her scholarship has transformed our understanding of the relationship between media, citizenship, identity, and democratic participation by remaining firmly grounded in the lived realities of the often overlooked experiences of people and communities. Her work reminds us that communication does not operate at the periphery of social change. It is one of its essential conditions. After completing her doctoral studies at The Ohio State University, Professor Bosch returned to UCT's Center for Film and Media Studies with a clear intellectual vision to connect rigorous scholarship with the realities of everyday people. Her early research established her as one of South Africa's foremost scholars of community radio, demonstrating how local media creates spaces for participation, strengthens citizenship, and enriches the public discourse. As communication technologies have rapidly transformed society globally, Professor Bosch was amongst the first South African scholars to recognize the profound political and social significance of digital platforms. Her pioneering research traced the emergence of mobile cultures through platforms such as Mixit, Facebook, and Twitter, X, examining how people build communities, negotiate identity, and use digital technologies to participate in public life. Her landmark scholarship on social media during the Fees Must Fall movement established an important framework for understanding how digital activism is used to inform crucial policy debates. Across 3 single-authored monographs and more than 80 peer-reviewed journal articles and book chapters, Professor Bosch has consistently demonstrated that digital platforms are never neutral technologies. They shape how communities organize, how citizens participate, how identities are formed, and how societies remember, mourn, and resist. Professor Bosch's contribution extends well beyond an exceptional publication record. As a teacher and supervisor, she is widely respected for her intellectual generosity and unwavering commitment to student development. She has supervised and mentored scores of postgraduate students and early career academics and researchers, creating an academic environment in which rigorous scholarship, curiosity, and critical engagement flourish. She has also demonstrated exceptional academic leadership and service to the faculty. As Deputy Dean for Research in the Faculty of Humanities, she has played a pivotal role in strengthening the faculty's research culture and supporting colleagues across a diverse range of disciplines. Beyond UCT, she has served with distinction as the president of the South African Communication Association and currently holds the NRF Sarchi Chair in Digital Media Sociology, where she continues to lead internationally recognized research while building the next generation of African scholars. This evening's inaugural lecture continues her important intellectual journey in exploring questions of platform power, mobile intimacy, and decolonial refusal. Professor Bosch invites us to think critically about some of the most defining questions of the digital age. Her lecture will no doubt challenge us, inspire us, as well as deepen our understanding of the complex relationship between communication, technology, and society. So it is now both my honor and a privilege to invite to the podium one of our faculty's most distinguished scholars. Please join me in warmly welcoming Professor Tanja Bosch to deliver her inaugural.
Thank you very much for that warm welcome. Good evening, colleagues. It's really wonderful to see you all here. I think on a good day, it would be hard to get this many undergraduate students in a room for a schedule like this. This is really quite special. This is a particularly special moment for me because in some ways, things have really come full circle for me. When I first set foot on this campus, I was an undergrad student in 1993. I had no idea that I would be returning here as a faculty member, let alone as a full professor. I was the only one of my siblings that came to UCT without requiring an apartheid era issued permit. So that was quite special as well. I was 17 years old. I wasn't old enough yet to vote in my second year in our first democratic elections in 1994. But that period on campus really shaped my political consciousness and my intellectual commitments, and sort of set the scene for the later work on the hashtag activism and network movements of Roads Must Fall and then Fees Must Fall, which began, as Professor Naidu pointed out, my trajectory into digital activism and network publics. So the key argument in my work has really been that digital technologies mediate everyday social life, but they also organize power. They shape who can participate, who becomes visible or audible, whose knowledge counts. And looking back now, it makes sense that decoloniality also became a central thread in my work. So my research on roads must fall and fees must fall, it began with digital activism, but it also raised then a much broader set of questions about knowledge and power, institutional transformation, whose voices are heard, whose ideas are recognized as theory, and which structures remain intact even when the language of transformation is adopted. Before I begin, I just want to remind you about this little prototype installation outside. It's a dead MacBook Neo. Ironically, Neo means new. And you may know that it was marketed as the future of on-device intelligence. And this prototype installation is titled RIP MacBook Neo, rest in peace. It stopped working just a few months after it arrived at our lab. And I'm going to come back to it later because in some ways the installation contains the argument that I want to make. So how to fit almost over 20 years of research into a 40-minute lecture. And, you know, unlike undergraduate students, I imagine you are much more of a captive audience. So tonight I want to develop two related arguments. First, I will introduce my concept of calibrated intimacies as a way of theorizing the relationship we have with our smartphones and our apps. I'm sure you can all feel them in your pockets as I speak, and reflect about how that makes you feel. And second, I want to talk about why a decolonial politics of refusal has become essential to my work. And I then want to introduce my method of what I call the platform obituary, which is about how we research platforms that no longer exist, platforms or apps that have died. And then I'll return to RIP MacBook Neo as a kind of material experiment in thinking about digital endings. So those are the kind of three threads that the talk will focus on. Up to this point, my work on platforms has explored the ways in which global South users, majority world users, exercise agency in their engagement with these apps. So in social media and everyday life, which was one of my first monographs, I explored how South Africans use various apps. So for example, like the sports tracking app to build community despite their inbuilt neoliberal logics of competition. I write about how South Africans use dating apps, for example, that are often seen as being primarily hookup apps. I explore and show how they're used by people to search for long-term relationships, and among other apps, as you see here. So the argument there was really, we know that big tech creates apps primarily for global North users, right? These apps are not created for us down in the South, especially in Africa. We also know that these apps, they surveil us, they harvest our data, they depend on environmental extraction and forms of human labor whose costs are borne disproportionately by people in the majority world. Yet my argument has been that South Africans don't simply accept these terms, and not just South Africans, majority world users don't just accept these terms that are set by platforms. They adapt them, they work around them, they reinterpret them, they make them serve, you know, social needs that go beyond the intentions built into their design. So I wrote about how South Africans' engagement with apps can also be seen as a form of creative refusal. And my concept of calibrated intimacy, began to emerge from this tension between platform power and user agency. And in Calibrated Intimacy, I explore that tension through the framework of the sociology of emotion. So I'm particularly interested in how these apps and how our devices make us feel. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. So think for a moment about your own relationship with your smartphone. When I mentioned it earlier, I'm sure you could feel the weight of it in your hand, in your pocket. You might have wondered, did I leave it in the car? Is it in my bag, etc. So what I'm talking about here is this idea that Spotify, or a music recommendation system, might recommend a playlist that seems uncannily appropriate to your mood or context. A fitness app may tell you whether your body is ready to train based on your recent sleep score. As you can see, I'm getting firsts for my sleep. I just put this up as like a sort of humble brag to show that sometimes I sleep almost 9 hours. If you have a child at home, there are many parents in the audience. You might be checking to see whether they've arrived home safely through an app like Live 360. I was tracking my son as he was hiking in the Drakensberg and wondering whether he was going to make it back home for the start of the semester. So my work theorizes the relationships that we form with apps. These apps that sometimes seem to know us better than we know ourselves, and the ways that these relationships shape how we feel, our emotions. And that's what I call calibrated intimacy. So have you walked 10,000 steps today? You know, have you closed your exercise rings if you're an Apple user? Has your watch congratulated you or warned you that you are tired? Mine has, but unfortunately I still had to come out tonight. You know, it's kind of, how do you feel when your life falls short of the neoliberal demand for constant self-optimization? That's what this work is really about. So apps are integrated into the ordinary rhythms of our everyday lives, for most of us at least. They structure how we move, rest, connect, desire, track, and withdraw. And these interactions are often understood through utility, communication, or convenience, but they're also deeply effective. Apps shape how we feel, how we interpret those feelings, and how we respond to them over time. So the central argument of my work is that apps function as infrastructures of feeling. They participate in organizing emotional life through systems that feel like care, relevance, motivation, convenience, or even connection. And this shifts attention from platforms primarily as spaces where people interact to infrastructures that organize the very terms under which emotional life becomes meaningful. Can refer to this as being, I guess, the soft power of apps. So it's the capacity of platforms to align feeling, expectation, and behavior without overt coercion. They're not forcing us to do these things, right? So the apps don't need to issue direct commands, but they shape the conditions under which particular responses come to feel appropriate or necessary. You get a move alert on your watch and you might get, oh, please don't do that during the lecture. I hope you got your steps in today. So this alignment develops gradually through our repeated encounters, right, with notifications, prompts, metrics, recommendations, algorithmic feedback systems. These moments are small, they're fleeting. But over time, they produce the sense that platforms are responsive to us, that they recognize us, that they accompany us, they align themselves with our feelings. And that sense of alignment is central to how platforms sustain engagement. It's also central to how power operates through them. So I've tried to develop, and I'll talk you through them very briefly, 4 central concepts to explain this process. These 4 concepts which I list here, and I'll very briefly speak through them. So digital intimacy refers to the affective relationships that develop among users, platforms, and the data through which we become knowable to ourselves and to these apps. These relationships are built through repetition, through accumulated traces, and the gradual adjustment of expectation. And we experience this in surprisingly ordinary ways. So you'll think about if you use a television streaming service, it will tell you what it thinks that you might enjoy watching, and it's usually often right. You know, think about your abandoned shopping cart on Loot or Take a Lot, and you get an email notification that says, "I'm lonely, are you coming back to check out?" Pings your email. Have you forgotten something, Tanja? Google Maps might tell you how far home is even before you've decided that that's where you want to go from work. Uber might remind you that if you leave now, you'll get to work on time. So I'm sure this sounds very familiar to all of you. So individually, these interactions seem very trivial, but together they become part of the routines through which we remember, anticipate, decide, and move through our everyday lives. The next concept, affective legibility, describes how platforms make our bodily, emotional, and social states readable. So apps translate experience into signals and categories. Life 360 and other tracking apps are a good example of this. So someone, I'm sure many of you have waited for a partner, a friend, a child to arrive somewhere, and you watch as the blue dot moves, waiting for them to, an arrival notification provides relief. A stationary icon might cause concern. I'm sure some of you may have texted a friend to say, are you okay? When you see that perhaps their Uber isn't moving or it has been stationary for too long, or a route that changes unexpectedly might prompt a text or a phone call. So the platform gives emotional meaning to movement, delay, arrival, or absence. The app kind of gives care, or apps give care and infrastructure. And this is effective legibility. The platform establishes the terms through which a situation becomes interpretable. And once platforms make bodies and relationships legible, they also begin to organize emotional life. I use the term emotional governance to describe that process that I've just described to you. So platforms shape anticipation, reassurance, anxiety, desire, recognition, and self-evaluation through those notifications and metrics and prompts and defaults and recommendation systems. They influence what feels urgent or reassuring or disappointing or desirable. And once platforms begin to make our bodies legible in this way, they start to organize emotional life. And that happens through these kind of recommendations, rankings, and prompts that shape what feels urgent or reassuring or disappointing, etc. So think about posting a photograph on Facebook or Instagram. There were some photographs earlier, and I was like, what are these for? Are they going to be acceptable for Instagram? A series of small decisions already begins. Which image should I choose? Should I edit it? Is it the right caption? We check for likes and comments. Not all of you, I know, but maybe I'm speaking to the students and the younger members of the audience. We notice when a post performs well or disappears with little response. So over time, those interactions shape how we present ourselves, what we expect from others. Recognition starts to feel measurable, and so silence could feel like indifference. Visibility becomes something to cultivate and maintain. So emotional governance is not about apps, forcing people to behave in particular ways, but it works by organizing the emotional environment within which decisions are made. Platforms shape what feels worth sharing, what feels successful when we seek recognition and when we experience disappointment. And then this concept, calibrated intimacies, describes this closeness. So this intimacy, if you like, that develops through the ongoing adjustment between users and platform systems. So the platform records what a user does, it infers what may matter, and it offers a response. The user reacts to that response, and the reaction becomes new data, and that process kind of, it's like an endless loop, the process continues. I think music streaming services are a great example of that. So I don't always know what to listen to. My personal music tastes are very eclectic, and they range from classical music to jazz to hip hop to R&B to electronica, Afro house, Afro tech, deep house. I could keep listing the genres. So Spotify registers what I play, skip, repeat, or abandon, and it will notice when I return to a song, when I stop listening to a song halfway, or when my listening changes. So a playlist appears that might suit a mood that I've not named. A song might arrive at the right moment and feel apt. The platform begins to feel attuned to us and our moods. A great example of this recently, where I got home from the gym, think about taking a shower and open Spotify, and suddenly it presents me with a shower mix. Listen to music in the shower generally, but and honestly, this feels like a little bit creepy, doesn't it? But so what's happened here is that my music streaming service has inferred a probable situation from a cluster of signals: the time of day, my previous evening listening, or the behavior of other listeners whose patterns resemble mine. What you could refer to as being a kind of anticipatory personalization. So the platform predicts a situation in which listening is about to occur. It offers a soundtrack for it. And Spotify and the other apps I use know about the temporal patterns in my life to make the shower statistically probable. And the recommendation feels intimate, right? Because it comes at a moment where this inference can be felt or experienced as recognition. And of course, there's a feedback loop. So if I were to select, I didn't play the shower playlist, but if I were to select the shower playlist, my response confirms then the platform's classification. And this same process, I mean, this is quite a mundane example, but that same process operates across TikTok feeds and Instagram recommendations, Google Maps routes, dating app matches, fitness feedback, location sharing systems, etc. So one of the central arguments in my current work is that platforms increasingly participate in producing emotional life. Calibrated intimacy is my attempt to name that condition, and the soft power of apps lies in the way this influence is experienced as useful, personal, and freely chosen. This is my forthcoming book. It is going to be open access, yay! So it means you can download it for free. So please read it when it comes out. If calibrated intimacy describes how platforms organize aspects of our contemporary emotional and social life, then the next question follows: how do we study this? How do we study these arrangements, particularly from South Africa or from the majority world? Now, when I first wrote this book earlier this year, I made a deliberate decision. I wanted to make a theoretical intervention on the basis of the concepts that I've just outlined to you. I didn't want South Africa to appear simply as a case study or as like an obligatory site of empirical data from which theory is then extracted elsewhere. I didn't want to be sort of pigeonholed. I'm sure this feels relevant to many of the scholars here in the room. I didn't want to be pigeonholed as being the South African scholar who writes about South African apps, which is what I did in my first book. When scholars from other parts of the world theorize, they are never asked to position their work within the context of their global realities, right? They write about Michigan or California or Amsterdam as though these are universal and global spaces. But when you write from Cape Town or South Africa, you are often asked to explain why your work is relevant to a global audience. It's quite odd, actually. So I wanted the concepts themselves to emerge without constantly having to announce that they were emerging from my locatedness in a particular geographic region. So this is actually something I'm still fighting. So when the first draft at proposal stage, I pushed back against this. And when the first draft of the book went out for review, several reviewers pushed back. They wanted me to write my South Africanness back into the book. And at first I resisted, but I think I've kind of found a middle ground. Their comments forced me to ask a more interesting question, which is, if I'm theorizing from South Africa, what should that actually look like then on the page? And I realized the answer wasn't to insert more South African examples or insert my locatedness. You'll note South Africa, there's no mention of Africa or South Africa anywhere in my table of contents. But I thought about how I needed to make visible how this place had shaped the concepts themselves, the political traditions that formed me, the histories that made certain questions urgent, and the everyday realities of South African digital life that generate particular theoretical problems from those that tend to preoccupy scholarship in the global north. So for me, this work in some ways is a form of decolonial practice, making visible the production of theory from the South, the production of theory from the majority world. Which brings me to decoloniality, refusal, and method. So because decoloniality has become something of a buzzword, I argue explicitly that decolonization is not a vibe. And by this I mean that I was hoping that the students would read that, and that has many downloads. It's been already quite widely cited. But by this I mean that decolonization has often been softened into a conference theme, syllabus refresh, or an institutional gesture that leaves the underlying structures untouched. And I extend the idea that decolonization is not a metaphor into the citation practices, labor relations, and platform politics of the field. So much digital decolonial scholarship remains focused on access, representation, and inclusion without asking more fundamental questions about ownership, extraction and control, who owns the platforms, who extracts the data, who benefits from the infrastructures through which digital life is organized. So my own contribution, there's the paper. They published it with the title that I thought they'd be pushed back on, but it wasn't. My own contribution brings these questions of political economy into conversation with questions of epistemic authority. And in my work, this article, among others, I propose several key interventions. So the first is situated citation, and that, you know, we know that citation is never neutral, right? So who you cite when you make an argument, it constructs intellectual lineages, it confers authority, it reproduces particular geographies of knowledge. And so I propose this idea of theoretical pairing. It's a concept that will be familiar to some of our colleagues from the Winelands who are here. Think about chocolate pairings or cheese and wine pairings. It's exactly that principle. It's about how do you pair, how do you put global North scholars in conversation with scholars from Africa and the majority world, not as supplementary voices, but as intellectual equals capable of reshaping the argument. The second intervention is around co-theorization and co-authorship as method and politics. So the idea that collaborators should be engaged as equal theorists rather than being performed as informants or sources of data. So disrupting the kind of uneven intellectual division of labor. And then epistemic refusal follows from this. It means refusing the canon. So the canon is the stuff that everybody cites, and those are usually Global North papers. It tends to render Southern life legible primarily for Northern intellectual enrichment. So you collect your data and you do your fieldwork in the South or in Africa, majority world. It is the theorists in the Global North that write about Africa and theorize about Africa. And when we write about anything in the South, we cite the Global North scholars who have extracted data. So that's the kind of cyclical problematic that I'm talking about. These concerns also appear in other parts of my work. So in this autoethnographic work on trail running, I reflect on how endurance, belonging, and access to supposedly open natural spaces are shaped by race, class, and histories of spatial exclusion. Who is recognized as a legitimate trail run in South Africa remains shaped by unequal access to leisure, equipment, mobility, safety. There's that joke that goes, how do you know someone's run a marathon? So not only am I telling you, I also peak academia. A related set of questions emerged in this work, where Mafeje Ikani, and Mafeje is here with us this evening. We reflect on the privilege that enabled us to move through a landscape as hikers on a 5-day hike, while local residents encounter the same terrain through histories of dispossession, uneven development, constrained mobility, and contested access to land. We also developed a methodology that we call media walking, so walking critically with technology, where the device becomes part of how the landscape is perceived, measured, remembered and represented, and that's a forthcoming chapter in a book called Mundane Methods. So this work, this paper, and the previous one, the experience of the walk itself, left me with some questions that exceeded the limits of academic writing, and that's kind of what led me to artistic practice. So I made a short art film in which the GPX file, the tracking data from our actual hike, cuts across and interrupts the visual landscape. And the turn towards artistic practice, in part inspired by my son, who was an artist in his own right, but also my concern with decoloniality. So art unsettles the assumption that legitimate knowledge must take the form of written academic argument. It creates space for embodied, visual, sonic, and affective ways of knowing. The film, which I'll play for you in a few minutes, it's only 3 minutes long. It emerged from our fieldwork data, so the intention was not to make a film. The footage was not captured with the film or even with art in mind. The film combines our voice notes, GoPro footage that was recorded by Mafeje, a music track that was produced by my son, audio, not specifically for the film, but I included it in the film, audio that was generated by converting the GPX track from the hike into sonic form, and it was exhibited at the Association for Visual Arts earlier this year. And the film really asks, what becomes visible when the smooth trace of self-tracking technology? I'm also tracking this inaugural lecture. It's really to keep time. On 26 minutes, I have 14 minutes to left. So the film kind of asks, what becomes visible when the smooth trace of this self-tracking technology is placed alongside the uncertainty and the unevenness of embodied movement? Does the data interrupt the landscape, or does the landscape interrupt the data? And this is the film which I will play for you now. And perhaps, if you don't mind, someone could just pop the lights off for a few moments. A set of three. Those. Thank you.
Perfect.
What we should think? What are some of the things we're looking out for?
I have never stopped to try theorize with that. How is this data? So if everything is data and my body is the research tool.
I think what's interesting about what you're saying, what comes to mind for me is there's this idea that you being perceived as being a white South African woman and me being perceived as being the coloured Cape Townian South African comes also with certain limitations maybe or opportunities to how we access different parts of the landscape, because I think our experience is
So the film was just one experiment with method, and I want to end the talk by returning to another concept, which is the installation outside. I was hoping that it would be in the room, but we've just positioned it outside the room, and it's just a prototype installation. So just trying to play. So the installation grows out of my work on platform obituary. And actually, I just meant to quickly first show you this slide. So there's this paper that I wrote, this work that I did, which reflects on the death of Twitter. And I've titled it as being an obituary of Twitter. And the question is really like, what happens to the publics that certain platforms hold? People move to other platforms, but the essential, the publics that were there sort of in the hashtag campaign, or think about something like Fees Must Fall, they become dispersed. So something kind of changes there. And so this installation grows out of that work. It's sort of an embodiment of this concept of the platform obituary. So I first used the method to ask, what happened to these publics that Twitter once held as the platform began to unravel. And this method of platform obituary that I proposed sounds a bit morbid, but kind of directs our attention towards absence, loss, non-transferability, and archival silence. Platform decline has become a defining condition of our digital lives. Endings recur because the economic and political arrangements on which platforms depend are themselves unstable. So any methodology adequate to platforms today must therefore treat instability as a starting condition rather than as an interruption to research. So my paper, which is still under review, not published yet, proposes a 5-step protocol for studying platforms that are dying or platforms that have already died. And RIP MacBook Neo is thus a material extension of this platform obituary method. So the dead MacBook outside, the devices in your pockets, the technologies throughout this room, they're saturated with other people's labor. Their raw materials move through supply chains. And when a device stops working, as that machine did only a few months after arriving in our lab, it may enter another supply chain. If it were not still here tonight as part of the art exhibition, it might have been loaded into a container of electronic waste, sent south or east, further south or east, where it would be dismantled by hand, sometimes over open fires, by people who absorb lead, mercury, and other toxic materials so that the rest of us can experience the convenience of seamless tech and another cell phone upgrade. So we often speak about platforms and apps as though they are ambient or immaterial, but every account of digital culture must begin with material extraction. So RIP MacBook Neo is not concerned only with what the device contains, where it came from, or where it might eventually have ended up. It's also an experiment in method. Academic research often requires us to convert our ideas into words, into arguments, into citations, papers, books. The installation refuses that conversion, at least in part. It keeps the object present. It allows the machine to remain damaged, excessive, and unresolved. And it also asks what becomes visible when a device is treated as an archive of labor, extraction, attachment, and loss. And for me, that's where artistic practice becomes part of decolonial refusal. It creates another way of knowing. It allows us to work with sound, memory, materiality, and affect, including forms of experience that cannot easily be contained within a journal article. So I think that the future of digital media sociology lies in theory produced from the South, in creative and experimental forms of scholarship, and in practices of refusal that make other ways of knowing possible. I also want to point out that that future is already in the room. Somewhere in row 4, I see many of my current postgraduate students, postdocs. It is present in the work of those students and the emerging scholars who will ask different questions, who will build different methods, who will continue to decolonize the field. And if I may, I think just spend a few minutes to say thanks to some people. I think at the end, but it's not the end of the journey. In some ways, it's the beginning as well of a journey for me as heading up the Digital Media Sociology Lab here at UCT as Saatchi Chair. But there are always way too many people to thank. So I want to begin this long but short list of thanks with my late parents. They were both school teachers. My mom taught me to read when I was 3. My dad was banned from teaching by the apartheid government, became a trade unionist and an active member of the New Unity movement. I grew up in a home filled with books, including books that had been banned. And so it was inevitable that I would become a scholar. And it was that background that shaped both my love of reading and my understanding that knowledge is never separate from power. My son hates to be singled out or be associated with my scholarship, as you can imagine, but I've apologized to him for this in advance and told him that he's such an important part of my life. I couldn't not say thanks to him. So to my son, Monet, he's taught me so much about social media and apps, but also about myself and about life, more than he realizes. I'm going to cry. So people say that children are our greatest teachers. So I can confirm this is definitely true, even when the parent is a UCT professor and the child is an undergraduate student. And then I think to all my students, especially across the years, but especially those in the digital media sociology lab, the cohort began, the lab was set up at the beginning of last year. It's really a privilege to think alongside all of you about platforms, apps, intimacy, power, and refusal. And they actually make me excited to come to work every day. And that's such a privilege. I also want to thank my colleagues in the Center for Film and Media Studies. Our department is it's film and media, so we refer to just as FAM within the UCT faculty, as colleagues would know, and I often refer to them as being my family. Also, a very special thanks to the UCT academics in English and history, who played such an important role in my intellectual development during the 1990s. Ian Glenn, Richard Mendelsohn, Nigel Worden, and especially to Anne Mager. Where are you, Anne? Anne was my professor when I was an undergraduate student, and I'm so absolutely delighted that she accepted my invitation to be here this evening. So thank you. Thank you. Then to Professor Herman Wasserman, the respondent to tonight's lecture. Our collaboration over the years has shaped my work. Herman's work has shaped the field. Herman was my postdoctoral fellow host at Stellenbosch University in 2005, I believe it was. So it feels entirely fitting to me that he's here tonight. I've always looked up to his scholarship and his work. He's always inspired me. He continues to inspire me. He's an A-rated scholar, and I might have those ambitions myself. I learn from him every day, but it's also Herman's birthday, so that makes his presence here particularly generous and incredibly special. So if you wonder why he will rush off afterwards, it's because of that. And not least to my partner Fee. I think she listens with extraordinary patience to every paper I begin writing in my head. It's usually on a hike or halfway through Saturday morning coffee. And I think she's sometimes as surprised as I am when those half-formed thoughts turn into a journal article or become an art installation. And then finally, just to return to where we began, the MacBook outside still doesn't work. And on your way out, I invite you to leave a note for it or for a platform that you have lost. There is a little card that you can scan that will take you to a Google form, which is anonymous, but you can also send me an email. So leave a note for a feed that you once read that doesn't exist anymore, or an account that you deactivated, an email address that no longer answers, or a digital space that disappeared before you were ready to leave it. And your responses will become part of future iterations of the installation. Thank you very much, everyone.
Fantastic. Congratulations. That was a fantastic seminar. Thank you. Professor Herman Wasserman will be delivering the vote of thanks. And Professor Wasserman is Professor of Journalism and Director of the Center for Information Integrity in Africa at Stellenbosch University. His books include Tabloid Journalism in South Africa, Media, Geopolitics and Power, and Media, Conflict and Democracy in Africa and Disinformation in the Global South. He is a fellow of the International Communication Association, a member of the Academy of Science of South Africa, and an NRF A-rated researcher, as you heard. Sounds like Tanja's heading that way too. So I now invite Professor Wasserman to deliver his vote of thanks.
Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Professor Collier-Reid, Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Professor Ramagondo, Deputy Dean, Professor Naidu, Professor Tanja Bosch, colleagues, friends. Good evening, goeienaand, molweni. Thank you very much for the invitation to offer a few words of thanks on this wonderful occasion. An inaugural address is not only an important event in the career and life of an academic, but also in the life of an academic community. It offers an opportunity to hear a colleague profess their expertise and learn from their knowledge, but also declare the passion that drives them. Because without drive and passion, attaining the professorial rank is difficult, if not impossible. It takes years of dedication, commitment, and hard work. As an avid runner, hiker, and cyclist, Professor Bosch knows the difference between a sprint and a marathon. And to make it here to the professorial podium is the academic version of an ultra. On a personal level, I'm especially delighted to be on the medal podium of Professor Bosch's academic race. I'm stretching the metaphor a bit. Having counted Professor Bosch as a friend for more than 2 decades and as a former colleague in the Center for Film and Media Studies here at UCT. Our professional and personal lives have intersected over a long time, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be here tonight. Thanks, Tanja. The intersections between the personal and professional are indeed also something that Professor Bosch touched upon very eloquently and movingly in their inaugural address, starting with a reminder of the exclusions to higher education that their siblings had to endure under the apartheid regime, and that later came to resonate in their research on digital activism, including the Rhodes Must Fall and Fees Must Fall movements on this very campus. To the link between the Garmin watch and the power of tech platforms, Professor Bosch deftly straddles the realms of the mediated and the embodied, the local and the distant, the intimate and the political. By approaching these intersections through a decolonial lens, Professor Bosch specifically locates them within the Global South and South Africa in particular. Professor Bosch's work on digital media and everyday life also presents us with a very good example of how the best scholarly work builds on existing work in the field, while at the same time pushes its boundaries. And in Professor Bosch's case, also just makes it downright cool. Very hard to follow something so spectacular like that. Understanding media within the everyday lived experience of people is rooted in the canon of cultural studies, where not only so-called high cultural artifacts are deemed worthy of scholarly attention, but where popular culture, in this case social media, fitness apps, and online dating sites are taken seriously. They are taken seriously not only because they impact people's lives in very tangible and recognizable ways, and people's lives are, after all, the focus of the humanities, but because they also are enmeshed in networks of power and politics. Digital technologies, including wearable technologies, shape people's everyday encounters with the world around them, how they map themselves onto space and place, how they consume leisure activities, and how they construct their identities in this highly mediated world. Platform power is exercised in many ways, from the shaping of online discourses and political agendas to the oppressive reminders in the morning that you did not sleep enough, that you may struggle to achieve your personal best on the Strava app today, that you might feel a little bit stressed and anxious today. So the technologies that interpolate us as active agents in the construction of our own lives, and those that facilitate our playful engagement with the world around us, are far from neutral or intrinsically benign. They also operate through structures of guilt, anxiety, capitalist normativity, and conspicuous consumption. So how then do users, Professor Bosch asks us, especially in the South, push back against platform power? Where might there be possibilities of resistance in the everyday? Professor Bosch identifies resistance in the possibilities of refusal, abrogation, and adaptation of technology to the concept of infrastructures of feeling, emotional attachments people have with tech, where personal experience meets public performativity. The emotionality of interaction with wearable tech also speaks back to the deliberative rationality of the Habermasian public sphere, one of those zombie theories of our field that just keeps returning. Instead, Professor Bosch opts for a focus on intimacy, feeling, affect, which in itself is a critique of the patriarchal insistence on instrumentalist, rational deliberation that we have also seen emerge in the decolonial movements of Rose Must Fall and Peace Must Fall. Professor Bosch's notion of calibrated intimacies offer us a space between the emphasis on structure and political economy accounts and the trap of unbridled and power-free celebration of agency that cultural studies approaches are prone to step into. Moreover, it does theory building from the South rather than just offering examples from the South to support Northern theory. Their work opens up a rich field for further research. Questions we may ask after tonight is the decolonial critique of digitality. We approach that through the lens of affect and intimacy. Can we ever really get away from issues such as inequality and class and privilege and exclusion? Is the agenda that these apps are setting for us, 10,000 steps, sleeping well, eating better, are they not in themselves first world problems, as the kids say? Is a different kind of engagement enough? Or would rejection of these agendas through disconnection maybe be more appropriate? And is that even possible? Also, how do we connect such a resistance of abrogation of platform power on the level of the individual or the personal with a broader demands for platform accountability? Because these algorithms not only set our Spotify playlists and track our sleep patterns, but they are also connected to platforms that use algorithms to to cause engagement around broader issues such as disinformation, online hate, technology facilitated gender-based violence, xenophobia, as we have seen in the last months. So are there connections between the personal and these broader geopolitical and political questions? And what do those connections look like? How far is the path between our Garmin watch and xenophobic mobilization online? And then what is the potential for networks of solidarity to emerge from the South? Professor Bosch's insistence on building theory from the South, rather than just providing case studies as the raw material for Northern theory, is a laudable one that echoes the demands for decolonization of our field. But even such knowledge production from where we are is bound up in the political economy and social capital of the global scholarly industry. How do we escape the transactional approaches to research that insist on certain forms of publication in certain spaces, accredited spaces, for certain audiences, if we still want to make progress in our careers as scholars and to reach the professorial stage as they did tonight? And Professor Bosch is a very good example of how that is possible, how that resistance and creativity is possible within the strictures of an academic career. How can we also recalibrate the very practices of knowledge production in academia? Professor Bosch's research practices of reflexive running and hiking might be a first methodological step in that direction. And the production of documentary film offers a creative alternative to more conventional publishing. But more importantly, the shift from the ethos of the monastic individual scholar to a more communal and collaborative one, such as we are seeing tonight here, with the presence of students in the lab coming to share also and share their knowledge in the lab in a communal and collaborative fashion. That goes beyond mere notions of inclusivity and diversity. And that poses challenges for how universities evaluate, promote, and support scholarship. And this is a challenge that Professor Bosch is so well positioned to champion. And I look forward to seeing how that work will also shift the boundaries of academic practice and scholarly knowledge production where we are here in South Africa. So this for me personally, and I'm sure for everybody here tonight, has been such an engaging and stimulating evening. And I'm sure you feel just as privileged as I do for having been part of it. Please join me in offering Professor Bosch our thanks for sharing their work with us tonight and wishing them well for their career path ahead.
So, Professor Bosch, on behalf of the University of Cape Town, I'd like to once again thank you for a very stimulating lecture this evening. And your inclusion of your experimental film significantly added to the occasion. And I must just say, I was sitting there reflecting on that, on the jarring juxtaposition of the XML and raw electronic data over the beauty of that coastline. It really was quite moving. Thank you for that. So this evening has reminded us of the power of scholarship to challenge assumptions, to spark meaningful dialogue, and to help us better understand the world that we live in. So thank you for sharing your intellectual journey with us and for enriching our collective understanding of digital life and the implications for our society. I also wish to thank everybody who joined us here this evening, including our distinguished guests, our colleagues, the students, alumni, and friends of the university. And your presence here this evening underscores the importance of celebrating academic excellence and supporting our academics' work. On a personal note, I'd like to thank Professor Bosch for her insightful comments that she made on the teaching and learning strategy. It really was an important conversation that I had in this very room with people like her. It really did give me a grilling and made me really recognize that technology is not neutral. I recognize that, and thank you for helping to instill that in the teaching and learning strategy as it's emerging, and you can take full responsibility for that. I now invite you to continue the conversation over refreshments, which will be served over there in the foyer. And thank you for joining us this evening, and a safe trip home. And if you please will stand and then just wait a few moments while the platform party exits, and then make your way through the refreshments. Thank you very much.
I forgot I was showing you my niece now.
Really, it's not a problem.
So cute. Can go on.
Oh.